Okay. So I just want to introduce myself. I'm Kree. I'm a graduating fourth year at the University of Chicago, and I'm also like the research associate for this database.
Congratulations.
Thank you. Okay, so first question, what was your first encounter with Shakespeare? Was it memorable? How did you become interested originally?
Well, I think like a lot of people, it came about going back to high school English class and sitting in class and the teacher asking us to just open the text and read the play aloud and switching from character to character. From an acting standpoint, I discovered that I liked speaking aloud, reading aloud, and eventually, from a Shakespeare point of view, I became very fascinated with the language, the beauty of the language, the depth of the language, and that led to my interest as it has grown all these years.
So that leads me like to my next question. I know that James Baldwin, he wrote an essay called Why I Stopped Hating Shakespeare. So I'm kind of interested in how your relationship to Shakespeare has kind of evolved over all this time.
Well, I love Shakespeare. I love James Baldwin. As a matter of fact, of course, it was a sad occasion, but I did attend his funeral in New York City at St. Patrick's Cathedral a lot of years ago. So love James Baldwin, love what he was able to do, and I hope that he's remembered these days, especially from our young African Americans of letters. Well, anyone. But having said that, Shakespeare over the years and even now and more so has spoken to me, and I I love his words. I love the words that he made up. I love the the ideas and the issues related to the human experience which he managed to touch upon in all of his plays. And I certainly, I certainly hear uh, the cry of suspicion that no one person could have written all these plays with all of these ideas and issues. And I hear it. I choose to believe that Shakespeare wrote it, but on the other hand, I'm always quick to tell my students, um, ultimately, I don't care who wrote the plays. I'm simply glad and delighted that we have been so blessed for them to survive, which is no small matter, to survive the 15th century to the present day. So I'm a fan, an unabashed, loving fan.
And I've also heard like instances of saying like Shakespeare is Black. So there's a lot of theories going on.
Well, um, I hadn't heard that. I'd heard that. I mean, some had said that Queen Elizabeth wrote some of his plays.
Wow.
Sir Walter Raleigh wrote some of his plays. Whoever did, thank goodness, thank you. Whoever did, wherever you are.
Well said. I do want to talk about, I guess, Othello and other characters that can be just in discussion in classes. We've talked about how it can kind of be traumatic to play some of his Black roles, like Othello. They're kind of traumatic and racist, misogynist. So, kind of, where would you position yourself in this discussion? Do you think it's traumatic for Black actors to continue to play these roles?
No, no. I understudied Othello many years ago when I was working as an actor, and of course I directed the play here at East Tennessee State some years ago, which I really loved doing. And I many years ago, of course, I heard the famous Paul Robeson radio record recording of his production of Shakespeare with Jose Ferrer and Uta Hagen, and loved it, and began part of my education, my stumbling, fumbling, youthful education in Shakespeare was when I began to listen to all these old recordings, mostly British actors, and trying to sound like them, thinking that I needed to do a British accent to do Shakespeare. But of course, I had a long journey ahead of me, a long evolution, and I see no trauma. Um, uh, I see trauma in the African American experience. I see a trauma in the existence of Black people on the face of the earth. Yes, I do. Um, but therefore, to me, Othello is simply one of many, many, many works of art that addresses that issue. Um, I do believe that um, Othello is one of only three characters that Shakespeare wrote where race was germane. Um, Othello, the Prince of Morocco and Merchant of Venice, and also Aaron the Moor in Titus Andronicus, where it's expressly, the color of their skin is expressly mentioned. Matter of fact, I noticed recently, I saw quite a wonderful production of Merchant of Venice recently on DVD from the Royal, actually National Theater. A wonderful production. And when Morocco exits the scene where he has not won the hand of Portia by making the right choice of casket, there's a line in the text that she says as he's left, which was taken out of the play, the production that I saw. And I thought, oh, wow, political correctness there. The line is, after Prince of Morocco has left, she says, a gentle riddance, go. May all of his complexion choose me so. And I had no problem with it staying in. It's in. It's part of the play. It's what it's about. I hope I'm answering your question. I see no trauma. As a matter of fact, I think trauma that exists for Othello because of his race, for Aaron the Moor because of his race, for Prince of Morocco because of his race, all of that trauma, I think, is addressed in the language of the play, in the story of the play. But in a very real way, certainly in terms of Othello, it wasn't ultimately his downfall.
Mhm.
His downfall was his jealousy and being willing to believe Iago. Now, of course, so much of this was set in motion because of his race, because he had the audacity to marry Desdemona. But so much of this is, all of these plays, in particular Othello, is so rich with ideas and notions about life and liberty and the pursuit of happiness and existence in the world and love. So, and all of the plays touch on all of those issues in abundance during the entirety of the play, and that's why his work is so rich. So I don't know if a young Black actor would feel put upon by playing such a role. I don't know if that. I don't know. I would be very disappointed if a young actor felt he couldn't play the role because the character wasn't strong enough. A strong Black man, you know. It's made very clear how strong Othello is.
No, I agree.
But what's also made clear is his humanity. And because he questions his worth, and that gets back to race. So much.
Can you actually speak a little bit to your experience in like preparing or in playing Othello? When I was reading up about you, I actually didn't even see that. So
well, now I didn't play the role. I understudied the role.
Okay, gotcha.
And as a matter of fact, I was working at a repertory company, and two plays. I was cast in two plays that particular season. This was Missouri Repertory Theater, now known as the Kansas City Repertory Theater. And this was the season, 1986 season. I played the lead in Fugard's play, Master Harold and the Boys. And then at the same time, the play Othello was part of the rep. And so I originally was cast as the clown in Othello, a role which is cut so often, and I think rightly so, probably, cut so often that nobody knows such a character exists. He runs in and he makes some jokes to Desdemona and all that very quickly, and is quickly forgotten. But I was cast in that role, and that role was cut. So I didn't have to go to the theater at night, but of course I did have to call in every night because I was understudying the role. So it was my period then of reading the play, working on the play, trying to understand the play and study the play. And of course, I have to confess that still my journey of learning was very much in progress then, and there was, at least for me, there was more of a notion of feeling that I needed to use my voice to play the role. Once again, remembering Robeson's great voice. And if you haven't heard that recording, I do recommend it. Quite wonderful. But it was only when over the years, over a culmination of years and being in many Shakespeare plays, also virtually all supporting roles except Bottom, the Weaver, and Friar Lawrence in Romeo and Juliet. Over many roles and many plays, I began to pick up on what his language was and what he was doing, and definitely with the play Othello, which I made cuts to the play myself. I made cuts to all of the Shakespeare plays that I directed, recognizing that certainly this day and age, and maybe unfortunately or fortunately as it may be, a college audience can't sit for 3 hours or more. But on the other hand, I understand that. I accept that. And so I made cuts to the plays, always to get them down to 2 hours, which is easy to do, actually, easier than people might think, because Shakespeare repeats himself so very much that there's so many images and illusions, as beautiful as they may be, which can be let go in favor of helping the show move along. And so by the time I directed Othello, I began to have a pretty good idea of what I thought about him and his plays and his work and his language, and finding operative words and making sure the actors were very clear about what they were saying, very clear with the audience of words that we don't understand or hear that often. And actually, I think there was a question here related to it as far as the production itself. And it was, I chose a traditionally dressed a production. We rented our costumes, our classical costumes from the Guthrie Theater, and it looks quite lovely. I'll be happy to send you some pictures. And so that's my feeling about Shakespeare, and I'll have a lot more to say about that as we continue to talk.
That sounds good. I'm not sure if you're familiar with Keith Hamilton Cobb's American War, but I'm pretty sure you would be. But in that book, he relates his experience of being automatically assigned to traditionally Black roles in Shakespeare and feeling excluded from acting in other roles. Is there anything you felt like you didn't have access to?
Many years ago, I was in another production of Fugard's play, Master Harold and the Boys. You know it? Wonderful play. Wonderful play. I was in another production of that particular play, South African play, at a theater company in Knoxville, Tennessee, on the campus of the University of Tennessee, the Clarence Brown Theater, a very nice a professional theater company in residence on the campus. And I was in that cast. And supposedly, I never met the artistic director. She was ailing, near death at that point. But I had heard before I got there that supposedly in company she said that blacks can't do Shakespeare. So I didn't formally meet her or have a chance to challenge her on that. But my particular experience goes back to days when I was pounding the pavement in New York, and occasionally there might be the notion of the question of roles in terms of, and this is 30 years ago, in terms of casting regarding relatives, brothers and sisters, fathers, daughters, fathers and children, mothers and children, and feeling that those people, those characters, fathers, mothers, in families, had to be of the same race, and therefore, since we were just beginning to grow in our perception of non-traditional casting, which nowadays there's no need to call it that because it's so prevalent, but we were just beginning to pick up on that. And so there were still a lot of theater companies where they were virtually all white. Or there would be black actors who would be in the company, in the production, who would have to speak well. You had to speak well. Matter of fact, you had an old truism years ago, you had to speak better than the white actor did. I know, in order to even get considered, you had to speak well, and also you had to be available for supporting character roles that were not related to anyone in the play. Unless, of course, it was Othello or Morocco or Aaron, where the roles were, or Caliban. Caliban became one of those parts as well, where the character's race was either specifically part of the story, or they were of such, in the case of Caliban, they were of such a circumstance that they were put upon by society and shunned and all that kind of thing. So I was able to work a great deal, but of course I was a character actor. Even when I was young, I was not going to play Romeo, no matter who I was. I wasn't going to play Romeo in an all-black Romeo and Juliet. I was going to play Friar Lawrence, which of course suited me quite fine. I was going to play Nick Bottom in Midsummer Night's Dream. So in that regard, as far as type goes, there was a period there where at least the sense of blacks need not apply. But long after the campaign from Actors Equity and the non-traditional casting project, and to this day, where multiracial, biracial casting really, thankfully, I would say, is the rule rather than the exception. And I would say that one reason why, in my view, you see this, particularly in Shakespeare, you can get Shakespeare at his best, absent of characters where it's mentioned specifically. Shakespeare at his best, those plays are about human interaction and ideas and love and hate and how people live in the world. It's not about, the culture, the language, the circumstance is so far removed from our own daily circumstance that truly it is easy to believe and accept that a black male and a white woman can be brother and sister, for instance, or certainly it's a given, Romeo and Juliet by warring families. So happily, we've come to a time now where, certainly in classical theater, and maybe even so in terms of contemporary plays as well. I know a few years ago there was a revival Comeback Little Sheba with Esipatha Merkerson playing the lead role, a black actress playing the lead role with a white actor as her husband, and James Earl Jones years ago, a very acclaimed production of Cat on the Hot Tin Roof playing Big Daddy, and he was the only black actor in the production. So much has improved.
So looking back, is there any role you wish that you would have played, or any production you wish you would have directed?
Um, I'm still hoping that there's a chance. I'd like to direct Romeo and Juliet at some point because I know it so well. I have acted in it 5 times. I almost have it cut and edited in my head for 2 hours, and I have all kinds of notions about what I would do with it. As far as roles, there was talk here at some point that, and maybe not impossible in the relatively near future, of me doing Prospero in The Tempest. I would say that because so much of my interest was and always had been famous characters who are not love interests. Actually, I do have a role I can mention: Falstaff in Henry IV Part 1. I would love to play that role. I understudied Falstaff years ago at North Carolina Shakespeare Festival. I understudied the role in a production of Merry Wives of Windsor. But that's a role that I would hope to play, or hadn't have a chance to play. Maybe someday, but it's out there.
Can you say why you would choose that role?
Because the sensibilities, the language, the fun, putting on a fat suit. I just loved the scrapes he got himself into, and how he talked his way into them, how he talked his way out of them, how and in that regard, it's not. I suppose it's not that far from Bottom, the Weaver in Midsummer Night's Dream, which I played twice as well. So that's why it comes to me.
Yeah, that's a good answer. So we've kind of discussed your thoughts about the contemporary, just with the, I guess, the introduction of like biraciality and just, I guess, cross-casting. And so I'm wondering, what changes are you hoping to see in future theater and in Black engagement with theater and Shakespeare?
More of it. That's what I want to see. And I would say, I think that there was a question here somewhere related to whether or not, well, the question of adaptability to African Americans and all of that. Now, again, by now I've had a long experience with Shakespeare. I've had a chance to evolve and grow and learn and study the language and fall in love with the language and what the plays do and what the language says. And as such, you may know, it led me to.
I think your microphone got a little muted.
It led me to write this book, which maybe you can't see here, but this is my book on acting Shakespeare, which I mentioned to you
yes.
in an email. I'll bet that you could get a desk copy. But in the future of Shakespeare, and African Americans, I see no limits. I see no impediments. The only thing that I would ever want from any Shakespearean actor, black or white or green or yellow or red or whatever, the only thing I would ever want is clarity of speech. Now that's a requirement.
Yeah.
We must understand what the person is saying because so many of those words are strange to us and foreign to us. And so we want vocal clarity. But other than that, and this is also my feeling as well, Shakespeare really, I think, is quite available to African Americans because we too, as a group, are very literate and lyrical in our language, very much in creating words, making up words. You know, pick up any dictionary of African American slang, and that's going to be very much in league with Shakespeare, who supposedly, it is thought, I think maybe even more, but it's thought that he made up, created 1,700 words. And so African Americans who understand the sounds of words and what the rhythm and pace, the syncopation of words, jazz and hip hop and bebop, all of that is very, as far as I have come now, is very, very much in the pace and rhythm of the ability to do Shakespeare. So that's my feeling about African Americans acting Shakespeare's plays.
Do you have any advice for newcomers, people just starting? I know your book is literally called Acting Shakespeare is Outrageous, Playing the Part for Beginners. So maybe you could tell us more about it, say what your intentions are, just any advice, because I know I'm actually really getting into Shakespeare now as a college student.
Wonderful. Pick up a Shakespeare speech and read it out loud over and over and over again. For as long as possible, don't read those notes at the bottom of the page. Follow the punctuation religiously. Look at that stanza of iambic pentameter and be very careful to not stop at the end of that line if it isn't stopped by punctuation. Keep going. You will and it will take a while, admittedly. It'll take a moment. It'll take more than a moment, but it'll take, admittedly. But if you follow the punctuation and the sound and the shape of the words, you will learn what that character is trying to say. Well, not trying to say, is saying. You will discover the brilliance of the shape of those words, and it will be very clear why this brilliant writer created these words in this way, so that his company of actors could learn their parts quickly to perform the play in front of an audience of 3,000 people on a stage with a hole in the roof. Punctuation, out loud. Forget Stanislavski. There's no Stanislavski. There's no subtext in Shakespeare. Characters say what they mean and mean what they say. And they always tell the audience the truth. Iago, there's no subtext in Shakespeare. Now I'm raving now because you got me started. There's no subtext in Shakespeare. His characters mean what they, and now, of course, this is the style of the plays. Then, certainly. Obviously, if you're doing Tennessee Williams, if you're doing Maggie the Cat in Cat on the Hot Tin Roof, yes, you're going to be wanting to deal with the subtext, absolutely. But even that, I have discovered, and this is what I'm so excited about as I continue to learn, being this strict about punctuation serves a contemporary play as well. I don't know if you've done any writing of your own, attempted a play or attempted a poem, but as you are writing and you're putting words in your characters' mouths, Your ear is hearing something from your own heart and soul and life experience. And that's what you're trying to put down on the page. And realizing it or not, wittingly or unwittingly, you are injecting that rhythm and pace into the words of your character as you write it down on the page, just as Shakespeare did. But anybody who wants to get started, give this man a chance. Pick it up, read it. Don't prejudge it by thinking it's so above our heads. Quite the opposite is the shockingly opposite is the case. It is so easy. It is though they so many times, you know, that famous actor's note from a director, just say it. You know, an actor is flailing and shouting and finally the director says, just say it. And that's a very, very good note when dealing with the work of William Shakespeare. So I've shouted and yelled and genuflected, but but I want so much for young actors, certainly young actors, absolutely young actors of color especially, to discover and pick up his text. It's not about a British accent. It's about clarity of speech, yes, but more it's about punctuation and the sound of words. So that's my thought about that.
And I think that's a great thought to leave it on. I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording.